Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome from the lunch. It is my responsibility to give you an interesting enough presentation so you don't fall asleep, which I'm sure I'll do my best for that. And in case of you, thank you for the nice presentation. Yes, I'm originally from Brazil, and that expressions, whether he's based in the Netherlands, what is happening about. And then I even moved about thinking about moving back to Brazil, but last year, given the World Cup results, I decided to stay in Europe. So that's pretty much it. But what we're going to discuss today is a real case example of a company, a large company, that was one of our clients that wanted to demonstrate the value of their products. And it was actually a product that had two, not one, but two positive appraisals from a health technology assessment agency. So everything related to the clinical benefits, clinical outcomes was clear. It's just a matter of, okay, this is an expensive treatment overall. And we're going to start actually just laying down some aspects, some foundations, just to share the same perspective around the medical technology industry and the value as well. And the last thing I want to say before we get started is, by all means, let's make this as interactive. So if you have any questions, have any comments, please feel free to raise your hand, interrupt me. And what is important is much more that we share learnings, that's why we are here, than to just follow the slides. But let's get started. So we are talking about the medical device industry, which is actually the medical technology industry, is the most innovative industry in Europe. And just to put some numbers on that, how much does it mean innovative? It means that every 50 minutes, there is a new patent for a medical technology. So since we started today, we have new products into the market. And each of these products is staying in the market, the life cycle of around 18 to 24 months. I remember when I was working at the J&J, and I was at the market access department supporting the sales teams. And we were making this value dossier for the surgical stapler that would go inside a patient into a laparoscopic surgery and cut and staple the organs. And I spent 3 months collecting all the evidence, making sure that the evidence could be understandable and usable by the sales teams. And after spending 3 months, I was so proud of my value dossier. I showed it to my manager, and he said, well, thanks a lot, that's a great work, but we have a new product. So these things happen. So it's so many products into the market, and the reality is that there is not enough money to cover all of them. And that generates some implications into the market. If we look back into the past, companies would need to demonstrate a certain level of evidence, which was mostly clinical evidence. Does your product work? Efficacy. Can your product work in my situation? Effectiveness. Nowadays, we are facing with a higher demand, and we need to demonstrate value much quicker than before. Because again, if we wait too much, there's another product coming in. And this has created some consequences. If we look into the average annual growth of medical technologies between 2000 and 2010, it was 10%, which is very healthy. But what is happening now, it has decreased to 3%, which frankly, it is good, it is great, the industry is growing, but at least it's fair to say not as much as before. So we are talking about decision makers, and definitely the clinician, the patient, they are all important decision makers, and they have been in the market since the beginning. But we have two other more. We have purchasing and we have reimbursement. And it's a very much a difference between short-term and long-term. And if we are in a company, we need to have short-term goals to reach our sales. The purchasing departments or purchasing groups, the trend we have seen is that they are becoming more professional. They are having more able to evaluate clinical technology, and most important, they are consolidating into groups, group purchasing organizations that actually sell their purchasing power to hospitals. And the reimbursement decision makers, they have a higher demand for clinical and economic evidence. Why should I pay for your product? After all, it's another innovation. But there is one thing the purchasers and the reimbursement authorities will look first in medical technology products. The first thing they look at is price. That's the initial aspect of what they see. And by all means, price represents 7.5% of the total treatment cost in Europe, price of medical technology. So why are we spending time discussing this? Why are we having that? Because this becomes, unfortunately, some form of differentiation among the products. But the good thing is that there are two ways for companies to establish their prices into the market. The first one is to lower your price. You can do that. You can enter the market with lower price. This will create an immediate effect. This will generate sales. And if you lower your price, you don't have to demonstrate value at all. On the other side, if you focus on demonstrating the value, justifying why somebody should pay for your device, it will take time, but it justifies the price. And what we have seen, of course, there is no black and white situation, but on the other side, there is no perfect balance. Either you focus more on demonstrating value, or you focus more on lowering your price. Well, giving the name of our company, you know where we stand for. But what is value? I mean, we have been talking about value, and by all means, each of us have a slightly different perspective, and probably all of them are right. And definitely outcome divided by cost, that's the perfect definition of value. And I wanted to share some perspectives that we also have with you, so we understand at least the perspective that we have here. First of all, value is a perception. It's not what the market, not what you will tell about your product, but what the market will see on that. And it is related to benefits to different stakeholders, not only physicians, but also non-clinical stakeholders, which means you have to compare. If you just say, my product is easy to use, or my product is a fast procedure, you're describing your product. Value needs to be compared against something, which means you have to measure and quantify the clinical and economic aspects. I remember I was once at my previous employer, when I was still working in a company. We were in this hospital in Italy, and we were meeting with the hospital director to present a new technology. And I was very happy because it's not every day that you have this opportunity. So I was there from the market access team to support the commercial teams. And I remember the hospital director was listening to our presentation, then he asked to the sales manager, so why should we buy your product? Why should we pay for that? And the answer was, well, our new device has 5 different sizes. Really, this was a missed opportunity because it's a difference between describing your product to a benefit for the market, and that you're talking about perception. So what we define as value, and again, most likely is in line with the perspectives that you have, and I just wanted to share some phrase that we put together, is the perception about the market from the clinical and economic benefits of your product. But how important is value? And this is actually the same slide we saw this morning. The only difference is that the importance for future success, low is in here and the critical is there. So this was actually research done by the Boston Consulting Group, and they interviewed 100 decision makers in the market, in the healthcare market. And within these 100, they interviewed reimbursement decision makers, leaders from medical companies, but also payers. The only thing they all agreed was the priority. Actually, it was the only thing indeed, was that value was the priority for all of these teams, meaning was they had the most importance for the future success and the lowest current capability level. So that's where they should invest. And now it's time to introduce us, because that's what we do. In Value Connected, one thing, there are many ways to separate, to describe you, but all of us that work in Value Connected has one thing in common. We all have commercial experience. We believe that commercial experience should be linked with technical to demonstrate value. There are different departments in the companies, there are different ways to do this, but when you put this together, then you have a better message. And it's time to describe how it works in reality. Let's make a case example of introducing innovative treatment. And the background of this, thinking about medical companies, we have different departments. We have the clinical, marketing, sales, and each of these departments, not all of them will be directly generating sales in front of the customer. That's fair to say. But nevertheless, it's also fair to say that each of them will be directly or indirectly supporting the commercial results. And it's important that the companies have a perfect alignment of these resources to the market. And if you think about the solar system, if we put value into the center, this high mass, compressed mass, and significant mass of direction, we believe other departments gravitate around that. By the moment you take the center, each department will follow its own path towards its natural direction, versus instead of circulating each of its own aspect around the value. More expensive than standard treatment. We had a client in 2014 that actually was bringing this new device into the market, and the name is not important. But it was a device that was actually costing around 40,000 pounds, and that proportionally in euros, to treat some specific population of patients. However, the standard treatment, let's put it this way, for these patients, if we can call it a treatment, was monitoring. Was just monitoring these patients in this patient segment if they would have some complication or not. And the complication was actually very serious, would be cancer. And only 12% of this patient population, according to the literature, and in this case the literature was very much solid around this as well, only 12% of them would actually develop cancer. 88% of these patients, if you are just monitoring them, they will be fine. Nothing will happen to them. And this client, they had actually 2 positive appraisals from health technology assessment agencies, 2 positive recommendations saying, we recommend the use of this technology because it's beneficial. So far, so good. The issue was that the purchasing department said, wait a second, 88% will not need this 40,000 pound device. Why should I pay for that? Why should I invest my budget into something like this? No, but we proved it works as clinical. We had the support from so many other stakeholders, but at the end of the day, this was limiting a lot the situation. And that's where we got started. So the initial barriers that we had to face was, if it reduced complication out of this 12%, does it reduce completely or just a portion of that? And what is the impact on the hospitalization? And how can we justify investing so much, because there was a part that could be covered by reimbursement, another was capital investment. So how can we justify such amount of resources invested into this? And finally, what would be the results for the hospital? The way we approached this was to take 3 steps. And basically, although these are 3 steps, they follow 2 things. First of all, position the company to understand the market needs, and second, respond to those market needs by making sure the whole company aligns around the value that you're bringing. So the first thing we had to identify who in the market, considering all the stakeholders, were actually presenting the barriers for the introduction of this technology. And the first were the clinical groups, not because they did not believe in the technology, but because they were having a hard time justifying the investment of that. They were not trained on this, and it would be a little bit hard to talk about economic aspects. And second, our friends, the purchasing departments, who said, absolutely, we don't want it to be by all means a barrier between treating patients and not treating, but we have to be concerned about the 88%. What if we use the budget to treat 12% and the 88 somehow they have other conditions that we are not able to treat? How can we do this? So this was the initial, I would say, scenario that we had to deal with. The second step, once you identify who are taking these decisions and what kind of barriers they're having, how are you positioned to answer to this? There were around 42 studies around this technology, but not all of these studies were addressing the needs. Which needs? To demonstrate how treating a certain percentage of population will actually reduce overall treatment cost, even for the 88 to 88%. Of course, there were some evidence gaps. How can we fill this evidence gap? You can fill these evidence gaps in many different ways. You can make registries, you can have studies that are, I could stay here discussing and learning from you many methods on this. In this situation, there was not such enough time. So what kind of registries, what kind of databases could be used to fill this vacuum in the evidence? And finally, what cost data is needed? And I'm going to ask a question for the audience now. I have been working in healthcare for 18 years, and I have worked in Brazil, in Europe, United States, Latin America overall, Israel, Middle East, and South Africa. Usually, I find that hospitals, they have a very good understanding of how much reimbursement they received, or they could receive, based on a certain product, based on a certain procedure. However, they don't have a clear idea about the costs behind that. How much they're spending with the surgeon or the physician and the nurse, and all those fixed costs that are taken for granted, but at the end of the day represent a big part of the cost, actually 50% according to Wilcomed. So this is what we were looking for, what cost data could be used to fill that information indeed. And finally, once you have this information, once you know what you need to demonstrate, and you have the tools in hand, prepare and communicate. So we were able to, and I will describe a little bit more about the approach, to demonstrate that by reducing hospitalization days inside the specific 12% would be more than sufficient to break even, and even more than break even, pay for the investment of the device itself. And for the purchasing departments, that included a break-even analysis for them, because that's what they needed to use. And it's important to understand the challenges of these decision groups, because they're not only talking to you. They have to evaluate a large number of medical technologies that come to them every single day. And we cannot expect that by giving the studies, they will read the materials that we're giving to them. It is just not fair. They don't have time for this. So how can we help? And more important than the tool itself, because of course, dashboards, budget impact models, this was a budget impact model, they will communicate the message. But most important is how you will prepare the commercial teams to feel comfortable to approach other decision makers than the clinical only. And when you do this, when you position yourself to demonstrate the value and the business case behind your product, that's when you become a partner. This magic word that we saw before lunch. And absolutely, partnering, as it was explained, and I agree, it's more than selling, it's helping, it's providing the business case behind what you're offering to the market. So in lots of training and lots of a preparation, what we did was actually a tool to, in this case, substitute the brochure. And this was, of course, a technical tool that could send emails, take screenshots. But coming back to the definitions of value, we were supporting decision makers showing the break-even analysis, demonstrating economic benefits, demonstrating clinical benefits, comparing results. Value is the comparison of your product with clinical and economic benefits. Demonstrating the financial impact. I don't know if you can see that, but there is a dark line here which represents the cost of introducing this technology. So this would be the patients without this technology. This would be the same patients with this new technology. So there is an incremental cost because you have to buy the device, but that immediately would reduce, according to evidence that we would have in the references, all these aspects. So it's a matter of aligning the evidence to support your case. And finally, providing realistic scenarios. You don't see there, of course, that is included into this tool, and this would be discussed, the price of the medical technology. Because we believe price is actually the first thing to be noticed, but the last thing they should be concerned with. It's much important to be concerned about value. And actually, by shifting the discussion from how much you pay, from how many patients should you treat, you start to see these charts moving. And then you start noticing, wait a second, by every 5 patients or so that I treat, I obtain certain amount of benefit from that. Again, I'm not saying that a budget impact model, a nice dashboard will do the work every single time. This is just a tool. This is just like a hammer. What is more important is what the work that you put behind this and how you prepare your teams to use these tools. Otherwise, it will be just a nice hammer standing at the side. So the main results, after 3 months that we implemented these results with the company, prepared the teams and followed them with their first visits, by focusing on value, the clinical groups, they had stronger arguments. They felt more confident about pushing forward to demonstrate the benefits of the technology. And the purchasing departments, I remember I was meeting with a purchasing manager, and he told me something that I very much summarizes everything. He said, "Thank you, you are doing our job for us." Which means I don't have enough time to do this for every single thing, and actually you brought the business case for us. And the company, of course, increased sales, but more than that, became a partner to the purchasing departments and also to the clinical groups. So as the last slide of my presentation here, the key takeaways is that if you talk about the value, if you make it properly and in line with the market needs, because after all, paying needs are objective, opportunities are subjective. The value can justify the price. And before going to this, understanding the needs of the healthcare system that you are in, because it's not only the hospital in itself, but also the healthcare system and the payers behind or that would be involved with your technology. And the ability to communicate messages is as important as the tool. There are so many solutions out there. Online, offline, iPad, laptop. Sometimes all you need is an Excel spreadsheet. Or not. Maybe sometimes what you need is a digital tool indeed. And finally, effective value-based strategies, as we have seen, impact commercial strategies to position you to demonstrate the business case behind your technology. And that's the solar system of value. And I want to say thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Great presentation. Any question for Ernesto? Yes.
Hello, this is Xavier from Spain, from Smith & Nephew. One question about database that is a key point to show the effect of new technology is that you need the implication of the healthcare professionals to register the data. And many times it's one barrier that we found when we start projects like this, because many times the healthcare professionals said that they don't have enough time, or they have. How do you propose to avoid this barrier?
Yes, and well, thanks for a question. And by the way, if you don't mind, I'll give one example specifically for Spain, if that's fine. So, which region of Spain are you from?
Barcelona.
Barcelona, Catalonia. So actually this happened in Girona, in Catalonia region as well. So what happens is that you have some markets, just like Spain, in which you don't have a solid reimbursement system. You don't have a DRG system, and actually you don't have data. So what can you do in these situations? And actually, when we think about data, when we think about evidence, and by all means, we are not pharmaceutical companies, but the first thing that we think about is the pyramid of evidence. And we think about the top aspects, which are meta-analysis and randomized control trials, which are definitely important and necessary. However, they talk about efficacy, which means ideal situation. You have a primary investigator there collecting the data. What is missing, and very much important to medical technology, more than for pharmaceuticals, is the effectiveness, which are the results on the bottom of the pyramid. Because for a certain hospital in Barcelona, it will be much more important for them to see the results in their real scenario than a randomized control trial overseas. So what we did in Spain was actually to develop this business case with another client that was introducing a device to be used post-surgically, but I can give you the details later. But what we did was a business model to sell collecting data at the same time. It's not a risk-sharing agreement, but in a sense that we're going to put 10 devices to you, this is the results that we expect. And that's what they saw. So it's a matter of generating data together with the selling results. Again, becoming a partner more than just selling devices. Does that answer your question? Another one? Yes, please. Okay.
I have a question. I mean, you're talking about value, and you specifically mentioned the purchasers and reimbursement as being the players to look at. I'm wondering, how do you see the role of the patient now and in the future regarding this value process?
Anything, in my opinion, anything that generates value must help the patient. Everything, value in itself is making the patient healthier or better or coming back to his or her home. The issue is that value has different meanings to the other stakeholders that are involved. The healthcare market is a different situation in which the person who decides to buy the product is not the person who's going to use it. So the physician will select a product, but it's the hospital who's going to pay and the patient who will receive that. So absolutely, patient is central to this, and even before value, something that I did not put in here, but we have to think about ethical issues, legal issues, and even societal issues as well. When you have all of these in place, then you can talk about value. But you're absolutely right. Patient is the first. It's a matter of, okay, how can we take that in consideration, which means supporting all of these 12% or 88% patients, but making it, demonstrating that it was affordable for the healthcare system.
Well, in relation to that question, how do you see patient groups and patient associations in the future being able to influence price setting and purchasing decisions in hospitals?
That's a very, very hard question, and thanks for this. It depends, from my perspective, it depends on the market. There are some markets in which we were not able, but were willing to introduce some technologies with some other projects. And these technologies would actually help the patient a lot. But realistically, depending on the country that you are in, depending on the healthcare system, they don't play a much significant role. Also, chronic diseases, they tend to have stronger patient groups, patient associations. For instance, you don't see, at least I have not found, but you don't see an association of fractured patients. You don't see that, although they are acute patients. So it depends. It's important to assess this, but nevertheless, I would, my opinion, weight the relevance and the importance of that throughout the strategy that you develop, but never ignore the patient. Just having expectations that, for instance, even in my local country, in Brazil, if you have the support of a patient group, actually, this helps a lot. But in other countries, it will not make much of a difference.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have one final question for you. I mean, we have been seeing also, while developing not as sophisticated but more simple tools, how do you get the buy-in of the sales force? Because in the end, they need to be there out, and training is one thing, but motivate them to use something which is completely new to them with the customer.
Excellent. I remember when I was a sales rep from Johnson & Johnson selling sutures. And if you're selling sutures, you know what you are? You are, because you're nothing. Because sutures, I mean, who cares about sutures? But you're just selling a commodity. And I had my Excel spreadsheet, my manual, my book, and everything that was around me. Because after all, J&J trains you. And when something else would come, I would feel, oh God, I have to reheat my margins. I'm under pressure. How can I do this? So coming back to the reality, from an experience that we have seen, it's unrealistic to expect that all of your sales teams will be able to communicate value at the same level. Some of them will never feel comfortable, realistically speaking, talking to somebody that will say, why should I pay for your product? While others will say, I really want to take this step. Or I can't take this step, but I want somebody else from the company supporting me. So one of the initial things that we do after we identify the situation, identify what we need to communicate, is actually assess with companies, realistically, who will deliver that. Because developing this tool and deploying to all the sales teams, you have two problems. And I'm going to be very candid here. There's a high turnover rate in medical technology companies. What are the chances that you develop this expensive tool, you throw to your sales teams, and a few months later, this tool is somewhere else outside your company? Could be. Second, when you take this tool, they're like a weapon, let's put it this way, and it can shoot backward or backfire on you if you don't use that properly. So I would say it's important to filter out and focus on those who can demonstrate the value.
Right. Any final questions? Yeah.
It's very nice, very good presentation, but
Thank
I have
you.
to ask you one question. What about public procurements or tenders where there is no specification? What about that?
When you don't have a specification,
Yeah. You don't have a specification. It's open tender, let's say, for everybody.
okay.
All companies,
Oh, no, okay. I think I
How
understand.
you can protect your value?
You only have the specifications inside the tender. Okay, of course. I see, I understand. In tenders, you definitely, what we see is that you're absolutely right. It's a different perspective because, first of all, if you wanted to, this was mentioned before, if you want to be successful in a tender, you have to be involved since the beginning, even before the tender is published, of course. But having said that, I don't think a tool like this would definitely help, because for a tool like this is interactive. You need to sit in front of somebody and show. This is not going to happen in a tender. Nevertheless, this is when a business case, and let's remember, there are so many technologies into the market. If you take the time to prepare a business case for a certain group of hospitals or hospitals, like with the tender, and you show the impact of that technology, this is something that definitely could help.
In negotiations, yes. But to be honest, I have a lot of experience in tender-oriented countries. It's very difficult. Very, very difficult when you have a specification which is open for everybody, for all companies, etc., etc. Sorry.
You should not be sorry. It's very difficult.
I always said to physicians as well, the best price you will get during the best value on negotiations. But still, in some countries, number one is public procurement and the tenders, unfortunately.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I'm going to give an example of this. When we were at KCI, my previous employer, we were in Italy. And Italy has different regions, of course. And for some regions, such as Sicilia or Puglia, we were not able to sell anything. They had tenders, not able to enter. For some regions, like Lombardia, they had, I would say, teams behind the tender. And although we did not have the reimbursement in Lombardia, the product from KCI were paid for because we won a tender. And we were not the most, I would say, the cheapest product. So back to your comment, you're absolutely right. It's not easy. However, it's doable. We have seen this before, and it's a matter of, okay, how much can I demonstrate or justify the price of my product? But depending on the situation, I must say, it could be really hard.
Just a comment to the tenders question. I think that, first of all, considering the new European procurement directive that is coming to place, we are starting to discuss about the cost per cycle or cost per life cycle, which is absolutely crucial term also in the tendering part. So I think that your tool could be used with some adjustments also to show this kind of value. On the other part, I think that in case we see countries where the criteria quality is also being considered in the tenders, and we have countries where the price is the only criteria. This is also would be interesting to use your tool to show where the quality impact has some probably long-term, short-term, mid-term impact on the budget as well. This might be just the observation from myself.
I know, and thank you. And just to highlight, I believe, and want to ask you this as well, because when you're talking about tender, it's a matter about talking about the economic impact of that technology. If you buy the technology, what is the impact? I think we can agree with this.